Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is Monday, June 10th, and we are starting our second week here of the game music composition class. Hopefully, you were successful in getting your music and sound effects created for the 2D platformer project. I didn't get too many big fires in my emails where people were having trouble completing the assignment or either the composition or finishing out the sound design. So we are going to start our session today with a bit of peer review. We have two submissions for everybody to take a listen to. And in the second half, we're going to turn it over to a discussion of the new assignments for week 2. So now you have finished out everything for your 2D platformer composition. You do have the opportunity of revising everything throughout the month. You will, if you submitted for this peer review, then you will get kind of a video summary of how that works now. Everybody else will get a video review of their own composition along with their grade. So that'll be coming up through this week. And once you get all of that feedback, then you have the opportunity to revise your composition and your sound design all the way up until the end of the month when you get everything working in the game. Because next week, in week 3, we will start getting your music and sound effects working in the game, and that will, or has the possibility of revealing new issues or new updates or tweaks that you might want to make with your music and sounds. So even as we go through our first round of peer review this week, and you get the grades and the feedback back, then you still have the opportunity to keep working on it throughout the month. So feedback is a great way of, well, for the individual, for whoever submitted, it's a great way of getting an overview of how you're doing on your composition. But I think it works out even more so to hear everybody else's projects. So you will hear things that you didn't even consider or different approaches. You'll hear about the good stuff, the bad stuff, and things you want to work more on and things you want to improve. It's all it's all constructive and all positive. So we want to make sure that hopefully after seeing this first round, more people submit, because the more we have to talk about each week, the better off we are. So hopefully this will encourage other folks to submit for our Angry Bots composition next week, and then our chiptune composition that'll be coming up in week 3. So yeah, first half, let's bring up Logic here. First half, we have our submissions from 2D Platformer, and then I'll turn it over to a discussion of the new Angry Bots composition and the sound design that you'll have coming up. So by the end of week 2, you will have all of the media, music and sound effects for both games, 2D Platformer and Angry Bots. And like I said, in week 3, we'll start putting everything into the game, and you can continue to update your both music and sound effects as you continue on. So that's mostly what we have in store coming up for today, what we have coming up for this week. So as you can see here, we have 2 submissions to take a listen to for 2D Platformer. We're going to start out with an overview of just visually looking at both of them and talking about the composition as a whole, what we're expecting, things that we're listening for, and just kind of the overall goal. And then we'll go through one at a time and listen to each one of them. The way I have this set up, as you can see, each individual student submission has their own track. We have, well, in this kind of column here, these are all the main loops. There are 3 8-bar main loops here, 1 and 2. And then this set right here, these are all of the intros, and then these are all of the endings. So, let's start with a discussion just, yeah, like an overview of what we're listening for in each set of files. So we'll start out by listening to the main loops. Make that as tiny as it possibly can be. Okay. We have our main loops here. These are 3 8-bar main loops. They are meant to loop. The first and foremost, they need to be able to loop individually or transition from one to the next. When any one of these plays and reaches the end, it can either return back to the front of the file, jump off to 2, or the third variation there. So one of the main things that we're listening for across all of the files is consistency. So there are some consistent elements from the music to make sure it feels like one overall composition. Instead of 9 individual files, the player will just hear one continuous soundtrack. So the things that need to be continuous or constant are everything needs to be in the same key, needs to be at the same tempo, the same time signature, and it needs to use the same instrumentation all the way across. So it's the same band playing the same music in the same key at the same tempo across all 9 of these files. And then with our individual variations, we're creating more development and change in the composition. Since all of these other aspects have to be consistent, the thing that is going to create the most variation and change overall is going to be the composition itself. Changes in rhythm, changes in the chord progression, bass line, and most importantly, the melody. The melody is going to have the strongest effect. You want to make sure you're using the entire 8 bars of each one of these cues to develop your melodic idea. Another aspect is the mix. We want to make sure that the mix is consistent all the way across. As you can see, there's a pretty big level difference between these two, but overall, you ultimately have control over the mix. You're creating all of the music, all of the sound effects. You're going to put it into Wise and have the opportunity to mix and change the levels there also. So the main thing is that you want consistency across all 9 of the music files, and then consistency with all of your music versus all of your sound effects. So at some point, you should take all of your bounced audio files, all of your bounced music files, all of your bounced sound effects, and put them into the same session and listen to them together to get an idea of how all of this might sound while it's being played back in the game. So the fact that this one is much louder than this one isn't too much of an issue because they are consistent amongst their own kind of grouping of files. So as long as the mix and the music is consistent, and then you'll have a bit more issue making sure that all of this loud music against what might be loud sound effects can mix and balance together. But again, you have Wise to make some fine adjustments of the volume of each one of them. Same thing here. You want to make sure that the music and the sound effects are going to compete well against each other, and neither one of them gets buried overall. For a specific example with 2D platformer, you have the gunshot. The first thing that anybody's going to do when playing the game is they're going to pound the mouse button and fire the weapon as fast as they can, and it's very constant across the entire game. So you want to balance the music versus the sound effects and make sure the most important sounds are being heard at any one time. So we have your making sure that everything's in the same key, in the same tempo, and the same time signature. Using the same instrumentation all the way across. You want to make sure the composition is constantly developing. You're not repeating an idea over and over again within a 2-bar phrase or a 4-bar phrase that repeats in each one of these cues. And then the mix. You want to make sure that the mix is consistent all the way across. So just visually looking at these main loop files, they look like they are set up ready to go, and they should be able to transition from one to the next. There's no obvious pops or like gaps or silence or anything in between the files. With the 3 intros, the main part about the intros is they need to build and rise in anticipation, build up energy before they're going to drop down on the downbeat of any one of these main loops. We have to make sure that all 3 of these main loops can transition easily between all 3 of these all 3 of these intro files can transition seamlessly into all 3 of these main loops. Again, there's no pops or clicks or gaps or anything like that. We want to make sure that it builds up the appropriate amount of energy, so when this section hits the downbeat of the main loop, there's similar instrumentation and a similar energy level as they build up into those main loops. With 3 endings, first and foremost, we want to make sure the endings actually end. It looks like all of these files are going to get cut off. This one looks like it probably very quickly goes to silence, but does actually reach silence. This one looks like it gets cut off. This one looks like it gets cut off. And each one of these also, at least visually, look like they're getting cut off. So you want to make sure that you give the endings enough time and enough room to finish and end in silence. The instructions say that they need to be 2 bars long, and the music should not be any longer than 2 bars. But if you need a little bit of extra room on the file or on the bounce to capture any tail or fade to silence, you can do that. You also don't need to, you don't have to use the entire 2 bars. So if you want to actually end on beat 1 of bar 2 or beat 3 of bar 2 to give you a little bit of extra room, those last couple of beats to make sure everything fades to silence, that's fine. You just want to make sure that it's not the file itself that cuts everything off. So we'll watch out for that as we are listening through those files. Let's see, is there anything else that I wanted to go over? Well, I think that's enough while we're just listening here. Let's go ahead, put on my headphones here, and let's take a listen to our first one. And we'll start with the main loops. Oh, actually, looking at this meter right here and looking at these files, I noticed that these are all mono. They were bounced as mono instead of stereo, so you're going to need to make sure that you provide the stereo versions. I really like the production all the way through. There's a great amount of energy. Oops, a lot of really solid changes and kind of rhythmic shuffles and stutters and fun stuff that's happening all the way through. You've got great drum track, solid like low end bass. What's the harmonic instrumentation? A solid lead line, solid synth. I mean, it's really kind of based off of the bass line and the lead melodic line. Some chords. Anyway, there's a lot, like I said, a lot of good energy all the way through. A couple of things that might work against it is all of the kind of shuffle and fill that you have at the end of each one of these cues. Now there's a lot of like cuts and stutters all the way through which work, but each one of these has what I would consider like a little fill or roll or build at the end of each one. Actually, 1 and 2 more so than 3. And I might avoid that in the ending. It's kind of like putting a drum fill at the end of each one of these cues, which will make it kind of obvious where you are in the music. This third one doesn't seem to do it as much. There's a little bit in the second half at the very end. Also, there's a little bit of distortion in that last kind of fill in each one of them. I think it's entirely on purpose and it's part of the overall aesthetic. But watch out if it, for some reason, isn't intentional. There's a little bit of garble in the end, and kind of gets more towards those. I think with the roll and the fill and the static, it gets to the identifying factor of where I am in the music. I think the third one relies a little bit more on the melody, which I feel can help take away those really obvious signposts of where you are, like the stutters and the fills, where you are in the music, and rely more on a constantly developing melody. So I think the production works very well. It would really be like, once you got it into the game, how does it feel? Can you tell which cue you're in? Is it really obvious when these things roll by? Another element is, once you get it in the game, you have the music, the sound effects, the graphics, all the other stuff going on, that it may not even be an issue. It may just kind of melt into the background. So those are the kinds of things to consider. You definitely want to make sure you bounce out stereo versions of all that stuff. And I have a feeling that's probably one of the reasons why the bass sounds so nice, is that it's just extremely mono. But compositionally and production-wise, it works out very well. All right, so 3 intros. We want to see how these kind of build up. You've got a lot of energy and a lot of movement and power by the time you're hitting this point, or the downbeats of each one of these. So we want to make sure that the intros kind of get you there very quickly. Let's see. I'm trying to figure out which I think you're ending on the 5. Ba, ba. I just want to make sure you're not repeating the same chord. No, I think you're all good. Like, I wanted to make sure that these were not ending on the tonic and then like starting on the tonic, or ending on the 5th and these start on the 5th somewhere over here. So this, yeah, I'm trying to. It feels like this sort of a halftime feel, especially through this first one. 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, boom, boom, and then here you kind of double what you're doing here, so you might need to build this first one up a bit more. These feel closer to the pace of this. Oops. So maybe if you had a little bit more movement or buildup of the snare, will help create more energy, because I think it's mostly relying on the chop and not the buildup of the percussion. You're getting some rolls in here. It's mostly relying on like all that stutter all the way through. So yeah, maybe a little bit more through the drums. You want to make sure that this almost has like a shuffle halftime feel before we get up to the main loops. Let's try 3 endings. These need to make sure you end everything out. I think, let's see, you probably need to end a little bit earlier, because these almost sound like loops, like 2-bar loops. I just set it up as a loop here. Like the energy keeps moving. It feels like it wants to go on to the next bar, next 2 bars. Like you need to end it earlier. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. Just end it on the 2 here, or you almost end it on the beat 1 of bar 2, and then you almost end it on beat 3 of bar 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. Could end it right there, basically where these big hits are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. Just kind of sustain and end and give it enough room to fade out to silence. Although with the synths, they're probably that you could just hold them and they don't fade, so you'd have to make your own fade. Right, so create more resolutions from these endings as opposed to that kind of looping, ongoing feel through there. And I think it'll work out well. So again, compositionally, what you're doing works very nicely. I like the production of the drums and the synths and like the stutters and chops and all that stuff works nicely. You just want to make sure that, number one, they don't make really obvious points of interest. Like, if I'm listening to this as a piece of music, then you want all of that interest in there, and you want those real quick moments of new and variation and like all the stutters and chops. It keeps the interest and keeps it moving. But with this kind of composition, you run the risk of it becoming like really obvious and really cool. Like, oh, there's that really cool stutter again. Oh, there's the really cool kind of fill, roll, or build up. Again, put it into the game in week 3, check it all out, and a lot of this stuff may not even matter because the production works very well and it provides a great bed for the rest of the gameplay and the sound design. So nice work there. Gave us a good chunk of things to talk about. Let's try the next group of main loops. I think everything visually looks good here. We'll start with the main loops. Another good one. Again, the energy and like the kind of forward movement and the bounce and the rhythm overall works out very well. It keeps like the energy of the game going nicely. I like the changes in each one of the cues, although I think that might be an area that would cause a bit of issue, and so we'll kind of discuss that. Let's go by like one by one here. All right, I think this one, the first one is like the least interesting of the 3 of them. Like it has a lot of possibility, but I think it's more probably like the shininess of the leads in each one of these. It might just be the octave, the fact that it's a higher octave. The leads stick out in each one of these a lot more clearly than here. The main thing that I heard was like a strong groove, a strong progression, but it really took me a while to figure out where the melody was until here. It's a little bit louder, so I think it's like the lead instrument of this cue needs the spotlight, needs to be brought out in front of the like farther out on stage, put the spotlight on it, and just make it louder and more present all the way through. Feels like right now a strong rhythmic progression that needs a lead. And I thought that would be the case all the way through, but you do change the lead. Now, when you add in a new lead instrument, it makes me wonder where it was in the previous ones. So for every instrument that takes the lead, like you have this one, and you have this one, those should also be in the other cues. Just taking more of a supporting role, adding as a harmonic layer overall. Probably an octave down and all that sort of stuff. So see if you can't incorporate all three of the melodic lines in the other cues. Well, don't use them as melody, use them as a supporting line. And then again, they take a step forward on stage, spotlight hits them, and then they do their lead line. Because compositionally, melodically, what you're doing with these is fine. It's just like this one doesn't stick out all that much. This one, I think, the third one is the clearest. And some of that is like the fact that it just goes down to the kick drum and there's just more clarity overall. This one is, I feel like there's like a lot of reverb, or there's like a lot more effects on this particular cue, which makes it smear around a little bit. It's not as clearly defined as what you're getting here. And then this one just feels more reserved, even like less high-end than the other two. So those would be the main thing. Overall, compositionally, which like the notes themselves are all fine. It's just focusing on the instrumentation, where the instruments exist, and then which one is really the focus. Let's do 3 of these. 3 intros. Let's see. Go. So these all start. They all, are they starting in like the 4, 5, the minor. So they definitely don't end on the tonic, and these all begin on the tonic, so that should work. But they starting somewhere else other than the tonic, and then like going like a 1, 4, 5, and then dropping on the 1, or a 1, 5, and then dropping on the 1, make it a bit more of a surprise as to where the actual tonal center is. Like if I start here, this is the first piece of music that I hear, then it'll be kind of a surprise that you're actually resolving to a much more of a major feel, at least on the downbeat of each one of these main loops. The other thing is they're pretty consistent in their intensity. Like it's another one of those, I could probably set this as a 2-bar loop and it makes sense. There's a little bit of a roll, like a change in the kick drum, but with the first one there, it's just that intense, or that consistent arpeggiator. Here. And I think it's the consistency of the drums. So try to have more of a fill or build or rise through the second bar. Like the second bar of the intro should be more intense than the first bar. And you should use all of the instruments to build or rise into the main loop so that everything drops down on the one on that. 3 endings. We need to make sure first that they end, that they actually reach silence. Let's check these out. Yeah, I think the ending 2 and 3 resolve a bit stronger, although the drums don't feel like they end, like they feel like they're going to continue. So it's the same sort of idea. You should probably hit the last chord, the last drum hit, like cymbal crash or like the final resolution on beat 1 of bar 2 or beat 3 of bar 2. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. So you could probably end on beat 3 of bar 2. So 1, 2, 3, 2, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. End there, or you can end on beat 1 of bar 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. Although it doesn't necessarily, you don't end on the tonic on that note or that chord. So let's do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. This one feels more like an intro where it's not resolving to the tonic. It feels like it wants to continue going because you're rising up. Da, 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 da. And then the third one here. Yeah, either one. Beat 1 of bar 2, beat 3 of bar 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. You just don't need that last drum hit. End everything, sustain it, fade it out, or let the reverb take care of it. And yeah, just create the endings. You just don't need the last beat or 2 of each one of these. And that'll make sure that everything ends in silence. So again, compositionally, it works out very well. You have all of the elements that you need. It is more about how they're going to work and specific elements of having it play back in a game and repeating and building up and resolving down. So all of the basic elements are there. Just a couple of tweaks overall of how to make sure that it smoothly transitions from your intros into your main loops and into your endings. So great submissions there, lots of stuff to talk about and discuss. Like I said earlier, hopefully this encourages other folks to submit for Angry Bots next week, or at the end of this week on Sunday. If you have any sort of questions or on either 2D platformer or Angry Bots, please reach out and we can take a listen to it. Or on Wednesday, if you have anything that you want to listen to or show off, you can bring it into our open session on Wednesday. But we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there for 2D Platformer. I'm going to turn it over to the archive for a discussion of the new week's assignments with Angry Bots. It's a new style of game requires a different style of music, a different overall approach to the music and the soundtrack for the game. So check that one out. And yeah, again, reach out to me if you have any questions. Thanks a lot. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and discuss the new assignments for week 2. So we have a new project. We have a new game. We have a new soundtrack. A new style of game requires a new approach to the music. And so our game this week is called Angry Bots, and it is a demo that is provided by Unity Games. Again, this game is built in the Unity game engine. Next week, in week 3, we'll start talking more about the technology, and we'll discuss game engines and audio middleware and some of the software and tools that are kind of running all of this stuff in the background. And like I've said before, saying like game engine is like saying DAW, kind of, sort of, not really, but sort of. Basically, in the same way that a DAW is the tool that you use to make music, a game engine is the tool that a game developer uses to make a game. And just in the same way that there's Logic and Pro Tools and they give away free projects and like, here's some recorded music for you to check out and test out how our software works, they do the same thing with games. They can provide versions of the games that people can tear apart, and we can get in there with our music and sound effects. So our new game for this week is a different style of game, different approach to gameplay overall. In Angry Bots here, you are this mercenary infiltrating a robot factory. The robots are none too happy that you're there, and they are bent on your destruction, so they will come after you. And your job is to kind of go further and further into the game world. This is a much more complete game. There is more stuff going on. Let's see here. Where am I? More stuff going on than 2D platformer, or more like there's like a beginning, a middle, and an end. Where 2D platformer, the score would just go up and up and up. This one, there is like an ending to it. You can actually beat the level. It's not a full game. It's just like one level of what would be a much larger game. But it takes about 5 or 10 minutes to complete the first time. This one is kind of a much more futuristic, techie designed world. Lots of kind of sci-fi influences, robots and explosions and lasers and rocket launchers and sliding doors and technology and all sorts of interesting things for music and sound design. It's not probably an all ages, family friendly kind of game. Much more kind of dark and intense. And our main focus with the music is the idea of ambient and action, switching back and forth between lower intensity ambient music and higher intensity action music. And when I talk about ambient music, I don't really mean the style or genre of ambient music. Not like Brian Eno, Music for Airports, kind of just a slow drone that never changes, never does anything. Ambient just means less than action. Sometimes it's known as battle and exploration. But this is the idea of there's a period of time in the game where you're just kind of wandering around the level trying to figure out what's going on. And lots of games do this, where there's a period of time where you're exploring and then all of a sudden an enemy jumps out and there's battle music. And the battle ensues for a particular period of time, and then you either win or lose the battle and you move forward from that. So same sort of thing here. We have to, if you did nothing else in the game, if you just sat there in a corner and hid forever, you would hear this ambient piece of music. Ambient doesn't mean just a drone, just kind of slow and boring. It can have energy to it. It can have good instrument layers to it. It can have drums and bass and harmony, maybe even melody, but probably we'll leave that up for other pieces of music. But it can have structure to it. It can have development, and it really shouldn't just be one slow drone that doesn't do anything and just sits there. So there would be an ambient piece of music until a battle happens. And when one of the battle happens, one of these robots comes out to attack. And you'll notice that the battles are pretty short, right? So this guy wakes up, he comes to attack, you only hit him a couple of times, and he explodes. This guy comes to attack, and I kind of toy around with him a little bit, run away, let him chase you. And eventually, you'll either destroy the bad guy or the robot, or they will destroy you. And whenever these battles happen, the action music comes in. And then when the battle is over, the action music will leave and return back to just the ambient music. The ambient layer or the ambient cue will always be there, will always be playing. And when you fight one of these robots, then the corresponding piece of action music will come in. There are 3 different types of robots, and each one of them has a different action cue or action theme that's attached to it. And whenever you battle that particular robot, you will hear its action theme. And then when you defeat that robot, that theme will eventually go away. It'll fade out. So you have an ambient cue, and then you have 3 action cues that represent each of the different robots. They can play at the same time and will play at the same time. So you will, no matter wherever you are in the game, you will always be hearing the ambient cue. Then one of these battles starts and the corresponding action cue comes in. So we have to understand, how do we add or subtract this action music whenever we want. That's one of the main challenges here. We have to be able to get into a higher intensity action piece of music and then return back to the ambient piece of music as seamlessly and invisibly as possible. So, how does the game know when a battle is happening? And the answer to that is it uses health points. It uses, you have health points, and the characters have health points. You might not notice, but this yellow bar on his back is actually a game meter or a health meter. And it tells you how long it takes. A lot to destroy you in the game, because it's mostly just to test out and have fun with it. And defeating one of these robots doesn't really take all that much time. So we'll have to discuss how we get back and forth between this lower intensity ambient music and higher intensity action music. Let me explain each one of the robots. The first one here is called the buzzer bot. This is the kind of flies around, is sort of annoying. It zaps you with these little lightning bolts. These guys are called the spider bots. They're basically bombs on legs. They come after you, and if they get close enough, you'll either destroy them, or if they get close enough, they'll self-destruct. They really don't do much except for chase you around and become annoying. These are the most frequent kind of robots on the map. There's another one over here. And let's go inside here. So, and then here is the third robot. This guy is called the mech bot. It's this big RoboCop-looking robot coming down the way here. These I would kind of consider like a mini boss. They're kind of harder to destroy. You have to unload into them to eventually defeat them. And then there's just the same robots across the rest of the map. The good thing with the music and sound is we really only have to focus. I mean, you really you see everything in the beginning of the level, and all of your music and sound effects will be populated through the rest of the game. So let's go ahead and bring up some of the other material. Let's see. Here's the PDF that you get. Hello? Is that not working? Shrink down. There you go. Okay. So here's the PDF you get. It discusses all sorts of different aspects of the composition of the project. You have action and ambient cues. Why do I keep turning away? There we go. You have action and ambient cues and a discussion of each one of those. How to play Angry Bots, hopefully, should be relatively straightforward, not too difficult to control. You can use the arrow keys to go up, down, left, and right. You can use the mouse to look around and then left click or just click on your trackpad to fire. There's a couple of listening tracks as reference. Different classic games in the style of this kind of sci-fi action game. Musical style. Here we're really looking and focusing on intensity. We want to make sure that whenever those robots come after you, that it's really powerful and strong and intense. He needs to feel like the danger of these robots coming to attack. Nothing too chill, nothing too laid back. Sometimes I hear some music and it's like, hey, robots aren't so bad. Let's go ahead and have a cup of coffee or something like that. And they're like, yeah, sure, that's no problem. Which is not what you want. You want intense and strong and loud, and robots are chasing you around with lasers and missile launchers and all sorts of crazy sci-fi sort of stuff. So you want to match that aesthetic. On the other side of that is another thing that I get that is better, but it doesn't work too well, is like Robot Dance Party, where everything is like super hypey dance and not that dark or intense. It's like party time, and that doesn't necessarily work either. So intense and strong instrumentation. I have suggested instrumentation, synths and pads and driving bass lines, gated effects, sweeping filters, bouncing delays, fast percussion, heavy distorted guitars, big fast drums, large brass and strings, cymbal swells and impacts, anything that portrays strength and intensity. Then there's descriptions of each one of the cues, which is basically what I'm discussing now and how they'll play back. What I really want to get to is the asset list down here. There's screenshots and descriptions of each one of the robots and how they should sound, and just a general overview. Then the asset list. There's a total of 7 files that you will create for this. I mentioned 4 of them so far: the ambient cue, buzzer action, spider action, and mech action. They're each going to be 1 to 2 minutes long, and they will loop 16-bit 44:1 stereo. So don't think about this as 4 individual 2-minute long compositions. Think about it as one composition that can be broken down into 4 parts or 4 stems. So each one of these layers is going to contain unique instrumentation. You shouldn't repeat any instruments between the different cues, so that when you hear those particular groupings of instruments or that thematic line or melody or instrument, whatever it is, you can recognize whatever robot's coming after you. You almost train the player with the music so that they can hear what's coming up next. So let me explain how these 4 files work, and then I'll get into these short stingers here. So when the game starts, if nothing else is going on, you are always hearing the ambient cue. Through the entire game, that 2-minute long ambient cue will be looping around and around. The ambient cue should be subtle. It shouldn't be too much in your face. It can still have a bit of rhythm to it. It doesn't need to have strong percussion, but it can maybe have some hi-hats or a arpeggiated bass line, or some sort of gated effect that will foreshadow the rhythm that's coming. And you should you want to lay down the foundation of the progression. This is going to map out how things are going to play back in the how all the layers are going to play back together. All right, so we hear the ambient from the beginning of the game. As soon as you've been attacked, you either shoot the robot or the robot shoots you, then the action music will come in. The action music will come in immediately. It will start playing from wherever it is in the loop, and you will hear action music. This point, you need the strong percussion. You probably need a couple of layers of percussion, bass line, harmony, and probably a thematic. I don't necessarily want to say instrument, like a melody, but thematic. Thematic line or thematic instruments, or something that tells you what robot is coming after you, so that you can give that sort of information and help the player. All right, so first guy, the battle starts, and as soon as he's destroyed, the battle ends. The music's going to start fading out at that point. Then these guys jump awake, the spider music will start, and as soon as they're destroyed, it'll stop playing and it'll fade out over time. So let's go ahead and load up some examples here. Talk my way through a couple of examples of what this might sound like. There we go. All right, so as stated before, you are going to have 4 2-minute, somewhere between 1 to 2 minute long cues or layers, or even maybe think of them as stems that can play back together and play at the same time. The biggest challenge here is going to be dissonance and clashing notes. You want to make sure that there's a lot of similarities between these cues. They need to all start at the same time. They need to end at the same time. They need to be in the same key, in the same tempo, and same time signature, and they need to all loop together. They need to follow a common chord progression. Because even if they're in the same key, if they're all headed to different chords at the same time, it's going to probably not work so well. So you need to, with all of the things that are the same, key, tempo, time signature, looping, starting, stopping, the things that are going to be unique are your choice of instrumentation. Each cue should have unique instrumentation that's only found in that cue. You really shouldn't repeat any instrument lines. You shouldn't copy anything, because when the game puts it all back together, it's going to double things up. Like if you have the same drum pattern in multiple cues, when you play them all together, then that drum pattern is 4 times as loud as everything else. So make sure that you have unique instrumentation, and then a unique composition. Each cue should have certainly a strong rhythm. That's going to be the most of the action part. And then a thematic melodic line, or thematic instrument, or thematic phrase, or something like that, that helps identify whatever robot it is. Probably a bass line to help, although you don't need necessarily a bass in all 4 of them. A chord progression, but you don't also need to put all of the voicing of every single chord in each one of the cues, right? So you write your chord progression, you're going to have 3 or 4 voices per chord. Well, all 4 of these don't need to have all 4 voices every single time. Maybe one of them is just the root, follows the foundation. Another one, you've got the 3rd and the 5th. Maybe another one, you get the 1st and the 5th, if you've got 7ths in there. And you can start, if you write out the chord progression first, you have a basic common structure or skeleton to work from. So let's go ahead and check this out. Just get started here. Let's play. Start with the ambient cue. All right, I am going to I'm going to play the part of the game, just mixing these up and down. And the whole reason this thing is going to work in the game is because when the game starts, all 4 of these pieces of music are going to start, and they're going to play together. They're going to reach the end and all loop together, so they're going to constantly be in sync. The only thing is, the player's only going to hear this first one at the beginning. The 3 others are going to be silent. Then the buzzer comes in. So let's do this. Game starts. Game starts, and you hear just the ambient cue. And then once you get attacked here, that's the buzzer bot, and so the buzzer music will immediately come in. And you're going to hear that buzzer music as long as the battle's going on. And then once you defeat that robot, it's going to start fading out. And the game is going to do this a whole lot better than I can and control it in the DAW. But it's going to fade that out. And whenever that robot attacks, that music comes in. So this is the buzzer by itself. So we've added the low strong strings. You got some big timpani hits in there, big low bass drums, and there's these little white noise sweeps somewhere, I think, in here. There you go. So it adds a little bit of layers. So this ambient cue is mainly made up of, has a hi-hat pattern in it, but mostly is a chord progression. This is outlining the chord progression. No, it's a couple of notes that are just kind of presenting the foundation of that chord progression. Here in the chat, it says, so that means we're making tracks separate, so that means the music can't clash. Yeah, you are probably best to think about it as one whole composition. So what I end up doing in my composition session is I'll set up a region just like this, like a particular length that depends on your tempo of your music, and you'll count out how many bars will fit, how many bars you want to use that will fit with between 1 to 2 minutes, and then just start adding instruments. I would often start out with a basic just piano. Just start writing your chord progression, even though it's going to end up probably a very synthetic and very electronic and all that sort of stuff. Start out with a piano or a basic keyboard patch. Write out your chord progression, maybe write a few melodies that could work with it, figure out what instruments you're going to use, and then just keep stacking them on top of each other so that it becomes one cohesive composition. But eventually they're going to be bounced out separate from each other so that the game can use them individually as it needs to. All right, so that is the buzzer. And once that buzzer is defeated, it eventually fades away back to the ambient. And then you go after the next one. So this spider pops up. When that spider pops up, the music is going to immediately add in the spider cue. It sounds like this. Hi-hat, bass line, a little melodic line that we'll hear is actually a double of the mech cue. Here it is with the ambient. And then this guy's destroyed. Guy chases around a little bit. When that guy's gone, the music will fade out. Until you get after this guy. And this guy is the mech bot. And he comes and he attacks, and it sounds like this. So with that one, you've got strong brass and strings. You basically have the high strings to match the low strings from the buzzer cue. You've got a strong lead melody. This one, where's it coming? Right about here. And you also have the ability to have 2 or even all 3 robots on the screen at the same time. So we could bring in the buzzer cue. Bring in the spider cue. And all 4 of these cues should be able to play together. No clashing notes, no clashing rhythms. Again, think about it as one cohesive composition that with multiple layers that can play at the same time. There are 3 other files that are listed in the asset list. The music buzzer stinger, the spider stinger, and the mech stinger. And those are there to help the transitions from the ambient into the action. The action cues are going to hit quickly, and you do not know where they're going to be in the music. So to help this transition, we add in stingers. And stingers are going to play when the action cue is introduced. So let me give you an example here. I'm going to divide this up like how it will sound in the game. Just kind of set this up so everything is set up correctly. Something like that, something like this. And then we'll put fades. So we got a fade out there, and a fade out there, and a fade out there. All right, so when the buzzer action comes in, when it comes in here, you'll notice that the buzzer, it'll come in probably in the middle of some phrase somewhere, doesn't have a strong impact, just kind of jumps up. So, I was actually at the end of a sweep there. That's actually kind of luckier than it typically is. Turn off my fade there. Thank you. Let's play that again. So it just comes in there. And so to hide that sudden transition, we can throw stingers in here. And the game, again, the game's going to do this all for you. A stinger should hit have a strong impact at the front and fade out to silence very quickly. It's meant to distract and create a little bit of interest at that whatever the random point that's going to transition. Provides a little bit of consistency, even though it is kind of just going to be a random point. If you're familiar with electronic music and like drops and impacts and things like that, that is commonly what a stinger could be. Stingers are typically have a strong impact, maybe some low end, maybe it could be a drop. And then there's another layer or two on top of what I call like some modulation or some filtering or a pitch drop or a filter sweep or a synth arpeggiator or something like that. These are all kind of strong impacts. They should not be tonal. They should not be rhythmic, because since you don't know where they're going to be played, it might clash. So a strong hit, lots of reverb, tails out to silence. There's another one. And like I said, they are there to cause a bit of distraction as you're going from one piece of music to the next. So here's what it might sound like when played against the action cues. And again, the game does all of this for you. You just have to create the material. So it should provide a hit, and then the one should fade out, and the other piece of music will already be there. Here's another one. And here's a third one. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of where to start with the composition. I'm going to play one more here. Let's get rid of that, and this, and this. All right, here's another ambient cue. So this would be a good example. This would be a good example to say that the ambient cue doesn't need to be boring. It doesn't need to not move or do any or have any changes to it. Here, you can hear the outline of the chord progression. You hear a arpeggiated phrase. You hear some percussion, but it's not like a kick, snare, hi-hat pattern. It is sporadic and meant to provide emphasis. Here is the buzzer cue. Here it is by itself. So it follows along, it's got a little melodic line to it. It's got drums, that's probably the most important thing to add for the action cue. Here's a spider. This one's mostly drum kit. Mostly drum kit, got a lot of crash cymbal in there. And here's the mech. Mech sounds cool, it almost sounds like an alarm going off. Definitely have to watch out when all four of these are playing to make sure it doesn't completely overload the master. But a common progression, a common pace, a common rhythm to it that allows each one of these layers to be added and subtracted at any point. Then the game, whenever a new idea comes into play, it can just fade in the corresponding piece of music as necessary. So hopefully that helps in describing how the composition is going to be set up. I do want to show off a couple of things with the sound effects for the sound design this week. Please let me know if you have any questions as we go along, or if you're just watching the archive, then you can send me a message if you need any sort of clarification. So that's the compositional side of things. You also have the sound design, creating sound effects for Angry Bots, 22 sound effects. Again, this is, like I said before, because it's a little futuristic and robots and weapons and things like that, explosions. There's a lot of fun opportunity for sound design. So let me just load up the sound effects. And I would suggest that you do something similar to last time where you would load the original sound effects into Logic and use them as reference. So let's see, I'll close down this session. Don't save. Get a brand new session here. Now, when you go download this assignment, you are going to get a folder that looks like this. It's called Angry Bots Original Sound Effects. And it's going to, you unzip it and it's going to have two folders. One is called To Replace and the other one is called To Use. There's a total of 60 some odd sound effects in the game, and I don't require you to do all of them. You can use some of the original ones to supplement them. So the one that's called To Replace, these contain the 22 sound effects from the original. These do contain the original sound effects, but these are the ones that you will have to do for the assignment. And the reason is these are the more interesting sound designy kind of sounds, if that really makes any sense. They are the more obvious weapons and robot kind of sound effects. The ones to use, these are some ambiances and interior shots. Then there's like bullet impacts and ricochets. And then there's also footsteps. So you're probably not going to win any awards off of your footstep design. You're not going to get hired off of your ricochet. Well, who knows? Maybe you would. But more likely, this is a focus on the music and the and more important sound effects. So something to consider, but we definitely are going to do and replace the to replace. I include the other ones there because you can and are encouraged to do all of it, so that whenever you show this off, you can say, I did everything in this game. Otherwise, some of the original sound effects will be there still. But let's just use the to replace folder. I'm going to take all of these sound effects and I'm going to drag them onto a track here in Logic. Open, place all the files on one track, yes. It always comes up with, actually this one doesn't. If it comes up and asks you if you need to change your sample rate, just change the sample rates of the files, that's fine. You're going to bounce them out anyway. All right, then once you have the original sound effects on here, you would probably spend some time, you'd probably clean this up a little bit. They don't need to be right on top of each other. So take these and separate them out a bit. Oh, that didn't work. Well, Logic, come on. You can cooperate with me. There we go. Do that. Do that. And you don't need to watch me do all of these. But just trust me, separate them out a little bit so that there's a little gap in there. So when you bounce everything, you have a little room. Then you would create a couple of blank tracks down below. And build all of your sound design directly below the original sounds. But listen to the sounds as reference for what they should sound like, how loud they should be, what's the shape or like the waveform look like, how loud is it, how long is it, just the basic properties of that file. And then you would build your own sound effects down below. I'm going to cheat here and just drag these down. You would not do this. Don't do this. This is a bad idea. But basically, if I were to fake it, these would be all of my effects. And you definitely mute out the originals when you bounce. You don't want the original files in there. They're really obvious to hear. And you have, then you'd bounce these out and you'd have your sound effect. And you'd go through and design all of these. Let me actually play these. I think this is going to work. Let's see if these broadcast. Airlock door close. That did not work. Hold on. How about this? Let's try that again. There it goes. Okay, this is airlock door close. There are a lot of doors in the game, and there are all the Star Trek kind of doors that open and slide open and close and do all that stuff. So there's a door open. There's a door close, and the assignment has pictures of everything, so you can play through the game. You can see what's what. A lot of times you can get away with the close just being the reverse of the open. Maybe there's a little like chunk, like ka-chunk at the end as it locks closed. But with these, you can use with hydraulics, pneumatics, servos, motors, those kind of things give you those kind of great mechanical sounds. Ambience, exterior rain. It's a rain loop. 30 seconds. Yours doesn't have to be that long, but just a consistent rain clip that you'll hear when you're outside of the robot factory. Interior hum. This is when you go in. This is like room tone. I always think that sounds like the inside of a spaceship or something. Like, as if I knew what the inside of a spaceship sounded like, but I'm sure. Something like that. Flying buzzer destroyed. There's a lot of sound effect. There's a lot of explosions. So the two main things in the game are, not main things, but things that have a lot of sounds are doors, opening and closing, and explosions. So what I would suggest that you do when you go do the sound design is you should be familiar with like the Westar Music Library to get access to sound effects there. There's another resource called freesound.org, which is a website. It's kind of a community-driven website. Westar is great because it has a whole bunch. It has the Sound Ideas Library, which is a great, like, very high-quality sound effects library. Freesound.org is community-driven. There are lots and lots of sound effects on there. There's also lots and lots of very bad sound effects that are not worth anything. But there's also some very good stuff in there. And for the types of things you're trying to do, a lot of that stuff can be covered there also. So what I would do is say, okay, I need explosions. So go off and search for a whole bunch of explosions, bring them back in, and then combine them all together to make the sounds that you need. Don't work on one sound at a time. Don't say, I need a flying buzzer explosion. Go find an explosion, bring it back, edit it, name it, bounce it. Then go, oh, I need a mech explosion. Then go back out, get another file, bring it back in, edit, name it, format. Like, that takes too long to go back around and around and around like that. Do it in chunks. A lot of times when I do sound design, I'll spend one day just looking through sounds. Like, just go find my library of whatever it is. And I'll just go, here's 25 sounds that I'll eventually put all together. Then maybe the same day or maybe the next day, I'll go back and I'll just edit everything. Put them all together, layer them up, see what works. Then often, if there's time, I might have another day that's just like mixing and bouncing and formatting and delivery, like finalizing everything. So if you work in big chunks like that, it often makes the process a bit easier. This is Zap Electric. This is when the lightning bolt kind of shoots out and zaps you. Mech Alert. All of the robots have an alert sound when they recognize that you're there. They kind of wake up and attack. So there's kind of an alarm sound there. Mech Destroyed Explosion. It's an absolutely huge sounding explosion, which is good for that very large mech robot. These are patrol mech footsteps. As that thing is walking down the hallway, you will hear these footsteps for footstep 1, footstep 2. I think they completely cheated and used the same sounds. You could probably make it a little bit more interesting than that. Missile explosion. So this is when it fires at you. So it shoots its missiles at you, which is this shoot missile sound. So it fires them, and then it either hits you or hits a wall or something like that and explodes. The spider alert. Right? So a little couple of beeps as it wakes up. You don't have to do exactly the same thing. Just kind of do some other stuff. I've heard very cool things where people have done like vocoded robot voices when these things like wake up and it goes attack or something like that. Spider destroyed explosion. These are the bombs on. That's when you destroy it. This is when it self-destructs. I think that is a horrible explosion sound. It's a real big letdown compared to the other explosions. Proximity. This is when the spider bots are coming after you. They beep. And it's very important. Just make that one little beep. And you don't want it to be very long, because what happens is as it gets closer to you, the beep gets faster and faster. It goes beep, 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 beep. And so if you have like a long sound, that's just going to stack up and sound all sorts of crazy. So all you really need is one really short sample. Spider self-destruct, that's the bad explosion. Interior doors open and close. These are the Star Trek doors that slide open and closed. I just think that sounds like somebody's window being rolled up or down. Locked door opening. Once you get, you stand next to these computer terminals and you hack the computers, and it allows these locked doors to open. Player death. This is when you die. That's not true. That's a gunshot. That is the incorrect sound. Let me get that out of there. Player hit. This is when you take damage. Player shooting. This is the gunshot sound. It's pretty important with that sound. That is going to be a looping sound. And it is important that you match the timing of those shots, because I think it matches the animation or the muzzle flash in the game, which is this. So this is player shooting. Oh, muted. Right, so that's just a loop going around and around. You would probably be best served 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's 12 in here. Just build your shots right below that and just use the same timing so that it creates this kind of smooth loop overall. And the last one is, I think it's the last one. Yeah, terminal hacked. Right, just some sort of electronic sound as the terminal is being hacked. I've heard people like type it on their computers, or sounds like a keyboard, or there's a voice in there that says terminal hacked. I don't know why a computer would tell you it's been hacked, but whatever. So that hopefully, again, will give you a good direction for your sound design. Always make sure that you mute out the original track. Don't include the original sound effects in there. Create the 22 sound effects for Angry Bots. And I think that should be it. That's certainly quite enough for me for this afternoon. We did the peer review of the submissions, which was always great. Again, it hopefully encourages everybody to submit also for next round. And then we talked about your Angry Bots and your Angry Bots music and sound design. So if you have any questions, go ahead and post them up in the chat or send me a message. But other than that, let's go ahead and wrap it up there. And I'll see you again on Thursday. All right. Thank you very much.